The government has decided to supply a record 170,000 tons of popular Chuseok holiday food items to tamp down prices and offer tax breaks to help boost spending. The number of births ticked up 1.2% in the second quarter compared to last year amid chronic population concerns. The total fertility rate, however, still remained very low at 0.71. The National Assembly held a full session today to pass bills concerned with the people's livelihoods, including the Nursing Act, in a rare display of bipartisan cooperation. It's August 28th, 6 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. Korea's harvest celebration this year takes place in mid-September and ahead of the upcoming autumn festivities. The financial authorities came up with measures to tamp down consumer prices by boosting supplies of popular food items to markets. Our economics correspondent Lee Soo-jin starts us off.
The South Korean government is planning to implement a series of measures to boost livelihoods and spending during the upcoming Korean Thanksgiving holiday, Chuseok. Measures including providing tax incentives and increasing supply were discussed during an economic ministerial meeting headed by Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok on Wednesday.
Due to the heat wave, the prices of agricultural products and other essential items remain high, and the recovery of domestic consumption is relatively slow, making it difficult for households to feel that the economy is improving. In response, the government has developed a plan that focuses on stabilizing prices and improving livelihood.
To help stabilize prices, the government will supply 170,000 tons of the 20 most in-demand Chuseok items, including cabbages and apples, the largest ever amount for a Chuseok holiday. It will also slash import tariffs for 10 types of fruits such as bananas and pineapples by extending tariff rate quotas to the end of the year. The quotas were due to expire at the end of next month. In an effort to boost spending in traditional markets, the government is aiming to raise the income tax deduction rate for credit card usage from the current 40% to 80% in the second half of the year. And to increase usage of onuri gift certificates, which can be used in traditional markets, the limit on the amount allowed to be purchased will be raised from the current 1.5 million won, or around $1,100 to $1,500. This comes as consumer prices, a key gauge of inflation in July, rose 2.6% on year, up from the 2.4% increase the previous month on the back of high fruit prices. And in line with the Yoon administration's continued focus on helping small businesses, the government plans to provide loans and other financial support amounting to a whopping $32 billion to SMEs. Along with these measures, the government plans to launch a pan-governmental task force to manage prices and bring them down to the levels seen in 2021. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
The labor union representing nurses and medical workers here in the country has been heralding a strike, which is set to begin tomorrow, while negotiations are still underway. The government is urging them to call off the plan as it prepares emergency care plans during the Chuseok holiday. Cha Yun-kyung has more.
According to the country's Central Labor Relations Committee on Wednesday, labor unions of medical workers at 11 out of the 61 hospitals that had planned to strike reached a wage agreement following all-night negotiations, raising hopes of avoiding an all-out walkout. Negotiations are still underway with other hospitals, but should they break down, the labor unions, which represent some 30,000 nurses and medical workers, will begin a strike at 7 a.m. Thursday. The Korean Health and Medical Workers Union is demanding improvements in working conditions, such as prompt normalization of medical treatments and a wage increase, amid the serious strain caused by thousands of trainee doctors walking off their jobs for more than half a year. Once the strike begins, hospitals will suffer from disruption to medical treatments, although they plan to maintain essential health care, such as emergency care and intensive care. Health Minister Cho Kyu-hong, meanwhile, urged the union to refrain from participating in the planned strike, which came in response to the lingering medical vacuum. Cho emphasized that the government will establish a real-time monitoring system and take necessary measures if medical institutions participating in the strike show signs of disruption in maintaining essential operations.
The government will continue to push ahead with the reform plan by taking measures to minimize medical inconveniences, such as extending office hours and weekdays for public hospitals that are not taking part in the strike.
On the other hand, the Health Ministry on Wednesday unveiled a set of measures to deal with emergency care before and after the Chuseok holiday next month. Public hospitals will operate in emergency mode for 2 weeks before and after the Chuseok holiday and keep 4,000 hospitals and clinics operational, along with 29 emergency rooms for critically ill patients. The Korean Health and Medical Workers Union and management lead are currently reviewing measures to raise emergency room physicians' pay additionally from the previous increase. 차윤경, Arirang News.
Findings for the second quarter of this year show an uptick in the number of couples tying the knot and in the number of babies born amid lingering concerns over population. Our correspondent Moon Hye-ryun explains.
Some positive news regarding the country's population crisis, as the number of marriages and births surged in the second quarter of 2024. Data from Statistics Korea on Tuesday showed that the total number of births between April and June this year came to just under 57,000, an increase of 1.2% compared to the same period last year. It's the first time since the fourth quarter of 2015 that the number of births in South Korea has grown year on year by quarter. The number of births in June recorded an all-time low for the month of June, but the number of births in April and May saw a rise, which is what led to the overall increase for the second quarter. There were also more marriages in the same period this year, with just under 56,000 between April and June, which is an increase of more than 17% compared to the second quarter of 2023. This is the largest year-on-year jump in the number of marriages for any quarter. A spokesperson from Statistics Korea attributed the surge in the number of births and marriages to not only a backlog caused by COVID-19 restrictions, which meant weddings were delayed, but also to various efforts from the Yoon administration to tackle the population crisis with benefits for married couples. One expert says that another big factor behind the rising number of marriages could be the current demographic.
There were a lot of births around 1992. So there's a large number of people in the age group looking to get married. The number of births could rise slightly because there are so many people in the age group that can give birth.
But it could be too soon to celebrate just yet. Last year, the total fertility rate, which is defined as the average number of children that are born to a woman in her lifetime, hit a record low of 0.72. In the second quarter of 2024, the total fertility rate came to 0.71, which is the same as in the second quarter of 2023. When comparing the total number of births from January to June this year and last year, the number for this year fell by more than 3,000. The population also saw a natural decline of 8,700 in June, bigger than the figure for June 2023. Natural decline is calculated by subtracting the number of deaths from the number of births, and the country has seen a natural decline in the population since November 2019. Moon Hye-ryun, Arirang News.
South Korean battery makers Samsung SDI and U.S. automobile company General Motors are set to build an electric vehicle battery factory in the United States. Samsung SDI revealed on Wednesday that the two companies signed an agreement to invest $3.5 billion to build the plant in Indiana. The EV plant will initially have an annual production capacity of 27 gigawatt hours, enough for some 350,000 EVs, and with further expansions, the annual capacity is expected to rise to 36 gigawatt hours. Mass production at the joint plant is set to start in 2027. In Parliament, in what is the first bipartisan accord of the current Assembly, lawmakers today approved an array of bills to improve people's daily lives. Our National Assembly correspondent Lee Si-woo has this report.
On Wednesday, the 22nd National Assembly representatives were hard at work, hammering out 28 pieces of legislation that will impact many aspects of people's lives, tackling pending issues in real estate, energy, medical service, and more. In a rare show of consensus, all 295 lawmakers present at the plenary session voted to provide greater support for the victims of real estate rental scams. A revision to an existing act, this will guarantee the victims up to 20 years of residence in the property they've rented. Another proposal restricting the rights of parents to inherit their deceased sons or daughters' money and assets when they do not sufficiently carry out their parental duties passed with strong support. The so-called Kuhara bill is named after the late K-pop star, whose mother and brother disputed over who would inherit the singer's money after her death. And perhaps the most fiercely debated, the revision to the current Nursing Act, which was tabled after a last-minute agreement in a late-night meeting of the Health and Welfare Committee. The rival lawmakers met halfway just hours before the plenary session and agreed to provide the legal basis for further medical practice by nurses who qualify to act as physician assistants.
This defines the additional roles of nurses with qualifying professional, clinical, and educational experience in providing medical service under a doctor's general guidance or delegation.
The Nursing Act aims to protect them so they can put all their attention and focus on providing medical care to patients and thereby ultimately protect the lives and health of the people.
This comes at an especially critical time as South Korea deals with a shortage of medical personnel at major hospitals after many doctors resigned in protest of medical school enrollment expansion, and just a day before the nurses planned protests calling for better working conditions. A goal since the previous assembly, the revision passed with 283 lawmakers voting for, 2 against, and 5 abstaining in an unprecedented bipartisan move toward a coalition by the current assembly.
But tensions still linger as the rival lawmakers prepare to discuss potential agendas for the much-anticipated meeting between their party leaders, PPP's Han and DP's Lee, which is expected in weeks. Lee Si-hu, Arirang News.
Moving on, North Korea claims to have test-fired an advanced version of its 240mm multiple rocket launcher as it aims to replace its old ones in the near future. The regime's leader Kim Jong-un was there at the site. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung looks into what's behind its intention.
North Korea has revealed what appears to be an upgraded version of its 240mm multiple rocket launcher. The regime state-run media reported Wednesday that Kim Jong-un the day before oversaw a test firing of the weapon with a new guidance system. The report claimed the test launch verified the weapon's performance with renewed maneuverability and firing capability. Kim reportedly also announced an important policy regarding the production and replacement of the weapon. This comes as experts say North Korea's existing 240mm multiple rocket launchers produced in the 1980s are aging and lack precision. The new ones reportedly have improved precision thanks to their guidance system. Back in May, the regime announced that the upgraded weapon would be deployed between 2024 and 2026.
North Korea's 240mm multiple rocket launchers are focused on attacking Seoul and the metropolitan area, and I think this is a final test fire before deployment.
There is also a possibility that the North may supply the upgraded weapons to Russia, as they had delivered 122mm multiple rocket launchers for use against Ukraine.
Given the timing of the escalating Russia-Ukraine war, and especially given the economic talks between North Korea and Russia, we cannot rule out the possibility of the weapon being exported to Russia.
South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff on Wednesday said the military detected and monitored the North's test launch and is keeping a close eye on signs of North Korea's provocation. The military vowed to respond immediately, firmly, and to the end against the regime's potential threats. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
South Korea's intel agency says that more North Koreans working in foreign embassies have been defecting to the South since the COVID pandemic slowdown. This follows a civic group's recent claim that more than a dozen North Korean defectors have been arrested and detained in China. Our foreign affairs correspondent PNG brings more.
Several people cross a shallow river in darkness. This is a video footage released by a South Korean-based civic group, saying they're North Korean defectors who were trying to flee to South Korea, but were arrested by Chinese police. The group said 15 North Korean defectors, 13 women, and 2 children were arrested in Kunming in southern China, which shares a border with South Asian countries. They were trying to take a speedboat to cross into a Southeast Asian country, then onward to South Korea, but were arrested as they were preparing to board. They will likely be repatriated, a fate that awaits nearly all North Korean escapees in Chinese police custody, and will likely be severely punished once they return to the north. The South Korean government said it's currently verifying the civic group's claim, while reiterating that North Korean defectors should not be forcibly sent back.
Our position is that under no circumstances should North Korean defectors residing abroad be forcibly repatriated against their will.
Separately, South Korea's National Intelligence Service said Wednesday that since the COVID-19 pandemic started to slow down in the second half of last year, there has been an increase in the number of North Korean defectors who used to work in foreign embassies or as foreign currency workers. But the agency noted that the number is less than the figure recorded when former leader Kim Jong-il led the regime. It also said an increase in this number is not necessarily a sign of instability in Kim Jong-un's regime, but added that it's closely monitoring these changes. In fact, in November, a senior North Korean diplomat based in Cuba defected with his wife and child to South Korea. And the Korean government has been saying the number of elite North Koreans with professional jobs escaping to the South has steadily increased in recent years. 배은지, Arirang News.
In the U.S., Republican Party presidential candidate Donald Trump has finally agreed to a TV debate with his Democratic counterpart, Kamala Harris, that will air live on ABC News come September 10th. Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
The last time former U.S. President Donald Trump took part in a televised debate was in June against U.S. President Joe Biden. With Biden struggling in that debate, Trump's chances of winning the November election rose. Months later, Trump has agreed to another televised debate. However, this time, he is looking at a completely different opponent, Vice President Kamala Harris. Taking to his social media platform Truth Social on Tuesday, Trump said he has agreed to take part in the televised debate hosted by ABC News against Harris on September 10th, but under the condition that the rules are the same as those enforced in CNN's June debate. Reiterating the previous rules, Trump said the debate will be held with both candidates standing up without pre-written notes. He called for a fair and equitable debate with no questions being given in advance to either side. However, the Trump and Harris camps continued to argue over whether to allow the muting of microphones during the September debate. Trump's campaign insists that each candidate should have their microphones muted when it's not their turn to speak, as was the case in June. However, the Harris campaign believes that the microphones should be open throughout the debate to allow viewers to hear if Trump interrupts or talks over the vice president. The debate is scheduled to be held in Philadelphia and will be moderated by David Muir and Lindsay Davis from ABC News. The September 10th debate was initially set to take place between Trump and Biden before the incumbent dropped out of the race. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Ukraine is poised to unveil its 4-part framework to end Russian aggression to the U.S. in September on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, and the success of this framework is said to strongly depend on the U.S. support. An Sung-jin tells us more.
Ukraine wants to end the war with Russia, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy seeks to do so by presenting to the U.S. a victory plan which will force Russia to end the war.
It will be fair to present this plan to the U.S. President. The success of this plan depends on him, whether we will get what is in this plan or not, whether we will have freedom to use the things prescribed by the plan or not.
While speaking at a forum on Tuesday, Zelenskyy added that he will present this plan in September during a meeting with Biden and will also convey it to Biden's 2 potential successors, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Zelenskyy also noted how the recent operation in the Kursk region in Russia is a part of this plan. Ukraine's Kursk Oblast operation intended to divert Russian military forces from other areas, especially offensives in eastern Ukraine, such as Pokrovsk, a key hub with crucial railway station. According to the commander-in-chief Alexander Syrsky, Russia has deployed 30,000 troops to the Kursk region, and the number is growing. During the same forum, Zelenskyy also announced that Ukraine carried out its first test of a domestically made ballistic missile, though further details could not be provided.
There was successful test of the first ballistic Ukrainian missile, and I congratulate defense industry with this fact.
Though ballistic missiles have been used against Russia, they had been provided by the U.S. rather than built domestically. Meanwhile, Russia's air attacks on Ukraine have been continuing since early this week, causing casualties and blackouts across the country. Russian drone and missile attacks targeted multiple regions in Ukraine on Tuesday, killing at least 6 people. And as Kyiv's incursion into the Kursk region continues, IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi stated on Tuesday that Russia's Kursk nuclear power plant was at serious risk of a nuclear accident due to its fragility. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
With Typhoon Shanshan heading to Japan, South Korea will be both directly and indirectly affected. In Korea, there are strong easterly winds, and typhoon and windstorm warnings have been issued at sea. Strong winds are expected along the coast. It will rain as much as 100 millimeters on Jeju Island by tomorrow, and up to 60 to 80 in the eastern parts of Gangwon-do province and coastal areas of Gyeongsang-do provinces by the day after tomorrow. Tomorrow's Seoul will start off at 23 degrees Celsius. Daytime temperatures will move up to 33 in Seoul and Daejeon, Gwangju, Daegu, and Gyeongju, 32 degrees. For the time being, there will be many places where tropical nights take a break in inland areas, but the heat will continue at around 33 degrees in the west, including Seoul. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
And that is Newscenter for tonight. Thanks for watching. A panel session up next.
Hi, I'm Chef Ryan, and today we're going to make kimchi bokkeumbap.
Thanks for joining us. You've tuned in to Arirang's Within the Frame. Live from Seoul, I'm Han-daeun. North Korea continues to advance its military capabilities, testing upgraded multiple rocket launchers and suicide drones while working to deploy some 250 missile launchers along the border targeting South Korea. As Pyongyang intensifies its weapons development, Washington is reportedly showing signs of a shift in its nuclear strategy, raising concerns here in Seoul about North Korea's growing nuclear threat and U.S. nuclear umbrella. In today's episode, we decipher the latest North Korean activities and evolving nuclear policy of the U.S., which is on the brink of a significant leadership change. For some insights, we turn to Lee Moon-jung, Associate Professor of International Studies at Gwangju National University. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And joining us from the UK is Dr. John Nilsson-Wright, head of Japan and Korea's program at University of Cambridge's Center for Geopolitics. Always a pleasure to have you on our show.
Great to be here.
All right, Dr. Nilsson-Wright, let's kick things off with you. The U.S. has reportedly revised its nuclear strategic plan, and North Korea was quick to condemn the move, saying it's an attempt to justify Washington's dangerous use of nuclear weapons. What have you learned about Washington's new nuclear plan, and how do you see Pyongyang's reaction?
Well, there is no doubt that Washington has had to confront an increasingly challenging world in terms of its security interests. The new nuclear policy, which dates from March of this year, has been really driven by four key factors. First, of course, is the war in Ukraine and the alarm on the part of the US administration dating back to 2022 that Russia under President Putin has been willing to push the envelope in terms of its own nuclear strategy. You may recall that back in October of 2022, there were real concerns based on traffic that American intelligence was intercepting between Russian commanders fighting in Ukraine, that the Russians were contemplating perhaps using tactical battlefield nuclear weapons. That higher level of risk, coupled with the second factor, which is the steady increase in China's nuclear capabilities, and the perception that within the next 10 years, China will have reached a level of nuclear armament that is equivalent to the United States and Russia. And thirdly, the fact that China and Russia are now much more closely aligned as a part of the so-called axis of authoritarian regimes, increasingly cooperating in the military space. We've seen joint military exercises between Chinese and Russian air capability air forces near Alaska. There have been naval exercises in the South China Seas between Chinese and Russian naval vessels. Those factors have all raised the alarm in Washington that US doctrine needs to change to deal with a more coordinated nuclear threat from China and Russia, and also, and this is the fourth key factor, potentially from the DPRK. North Korea with some 60 nuclear weapons, perhaps as many as 90 or 100, if you add in its other capabilities, and now increasingly cooperating with Moscow as a result of the new strategic partnership between Russia and the DPRK. All of that adds up to a much graver coordinated nuclear threat from Moscow, Beijing, and the DPRK, and therefore the US has had to reassess its nuclear doctrine, and that's why we're seeing increasingly now in the public space with US officials talking about this new doctrine, a willingness on the part of Washington to think again about how best to confront not just Russia, as was the case during the Cold War, but a coordinated nuclear approach by those three countries, China, Russia, and potentially North Korea.
So the U.S. is certainly faced with greater nuclear threats coming from many different directions. Now, reports of Washington's new nuclear strategy drew an almost immediate response from North Korea, but the reclusive state still remains silent to President Yoon's new unification doctrine unveiled 2 weeks ago. Professor Lim, what are you reading into this?
As you know, the August 15 is absolutely important date for Korean people, and it's a day of liberation. And then during his speech at the stage, again, the President Yoon suggested so-called August 15 doctrine, which was reaffirmed the importance of freedom, and he also emphasized the Korean unification can contribute to the world peace and prosperity. So basically, the freedom, peace, prosperity, these three are the key words of the August 15 doctrine, I would say. Having had the doctrine, again, presented by the President Yoon, again, as you just pointed out, the Pyongyang seems to be pretty silent, which can be interpreted or regarded as an unusual reaction. No reaction is an unusual thing, because if we recall our memories, again, that they have condemned, for example, some, especially conservative governments' speech, those kind of doctrines with the very vocal words and pretty furious criticism. However, again, at this time, it looks like they are more focusing on the Washington's changes in Washington's strategy rather than, again, some changes, even though it is a more like an upgraded version of our unprecedented governments. But anyhow, it looks like again they keep their silence on the August 15 doctrine. Of course, we can interpret this in two different ways. I will say, again, if we take it very negatively, of course, they trying to be ignorant to whatever those changes made by our government. But at the same time, if we see it with some positive senses, I will say again that they might be trying to be more cautious about their own reaction to the doctrine, because rather than they respect us, of course they're not that much respectful for our government, but rather again it looks like they are cautious about the domestic reaction, because as the previous reports already said, more and more, again, the North Korean, those refugees or defectors, they are trying to come. And recently, again, we did have a high-profile diplomat who served in Cuba. He also came to the south, our country. And according to his testimony, again, ever since North Korea, Pyongyang changed the wording, again, toward us, they use now as a separate country, as an enemy. And having had that, again, the North Korean people became very much frustrated, because they almost like lost a chance to be part of New Korea. So probably, this is my kind of just bare guess, but they might be more cautious about any of those, those domestic response. That is why probably they are trying to be silent to the August 15 doctrine, I would say.
So as you pointed out, North Korea seems to be much more concerned about what's coming out of the U.S. than from South Korea. And on that note, Dr. Nielsen-Wright, the denuclearization goal of North Korea has been removed from both U.S. Democratic and Republican policy platforms. Is Washington shifting away from its long-held goal of CVID, or complete, verifiable, and irreversible dismantlement of North Korea, and moving towards arms control?
Well, I mean, it's logical to assume that given the state of North Korea's nuclear capabilities, that there might be a reluctant willingness on the part of some in the United States to suggest that the American approach should focus on arms control. And there have been some prominent voices, such as Bob Colucci, for example, a former official who negotiated with North Korea in the 1990s, who've made that argument. However, I would add a cautionary note. I think at this stage, both for the Republican and the Democrats, there's no real desire in the few weeks remaining before the November election to do anything that might be seen as creating instability or an uncertainty on the Korean Peninsula. And where the Democrats are concerned, and their new candidate, Vice President Harris, I think it's a much more cautious, consistent approach, emphasizing the importance of a tough and resilient foreign policy, not a resiling from that goal of denuclearization. In fact, Senator Ben Cardin, the Democratic senator of the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, has recently come out and said that Kamala Harris, if she's elected president, will be focused still on denuclearization. I think it's also important to recognize that from the point of view of the Biden administration, which has put so much emphasis on developing strong alliance ties with both South Korea and with Japan, there will have been a real sensitivity and recognition of doing nothing that would raise alarm bells in Seoul. So I think I would stress the importance of being cautious in not over-interpreting those joint campaign statements by both the Republicans and the Democrats. As for the Republicans themselves, I think it's an open question whether Donald Trump really has much time or bandwidth to focus on the question of the DPRK. At the moment, he is now facing a much changed campaign. When it comes to policy towards the region, I think his focus is likely to be much more on China rather than on the DPRK per se. And if anything, what we will see whoever wins, I think, in November, is a renewed focus on getting allies to do more to meet their own defense needs. Donald Trump has come out in the last day or so saying that allies will need to spend 3% of GDP on defense. That's a major change. That's likely to create, I think, a lot of pressure in Seoul, Tokyo, and elsewhere. So I think the more cautious and I think more accurate interpretation is to say that the United States at the moment will not back away from that policy of focusing on denuclearization, and at the same time will strengthen deterrence, and that's going to be a very key part in keeping the region stable.
The reports of the U.S. dropping the denuclearization goal of North Korea have reignited debate on South Korea's nuclearization. Professor Lim, what's your take on the issue?
Well, first of all, let me just clear with this. I personally, I'm against that idea, again, the nuclear armament by ourselves. The extended deterrence, of course, we already have a very robust extended deterrence capability with the alliance of U.S. However, of course, people, more and more Korean people are really concerned about this unbalanced situations between the North and South. Even though, of course, our conventional military capability, of course, is way beyond again the North Korea's conventional military capacity. However, as long as they have nuke and as long as they have a delivery system, again, it can be absolutely threatening to our own people. So people again asking more like a balance. Some will say, it might be just a balance of threat, but anyhow, more and more South Korean people want a balanced situation. That is why, again, if you take any public poll data, it depends on, of course, by which institution did the survey, but still approximately between like a 60 and 70, or even sometimes more than 70% of the Korean respondents support that idea. The thing is, we have to think about aftermath. Hypothetically, let's say, again, that we have our own nuclear weapons. Of course, we might have some technologies, we have some financial resources to do this. However, again, we have to think about aftermath. Again, it will really trigger, I would say, again, the dominoes, nuclear dominoes in this region, which cannot be positive at all for peace and stability in this region. And as long as, peace and stability is shaken in this region, if so, the global peace, again, the world peace cannot be expected in a positive way either. So again, I personally do, even though I understand why, again, the Korean people are more supportive for that kind of idea, but realistically, it's not that feasible. And second, again, it's not, I don't say, again, that it's a desirable option.
Dr. Nielsen Wright, South Korea's National Intelligence Service has raised questions about North Korea's missile production capabilities to fully operate its 250 new missile launchers unveiled earlier this month. What's your take on this, and how do you gauge the threat of the new missile launchers?
Well, I think bottom line is we need to take the threat from North Korea very, very seriously. This deployment of 250 missile launchers is consistent with a much more belligerent approach on the part of Kim Jong-un that we've seen over the last few months and years, in fact. We know, of course, that the North has stepped up its rhetoric. It's torn up its commitment to the idea, the principle of reunification, a major shift in the political stance of the regime. There's also been evidence of considerable efforts to challenge the integrity of the borders between the two countries. Missile firing near the northern limit line, the reinforcement of the border fortifications at the DMZ, and all of this, of course, very much reinforced by Kim Jong-un's new strategic partnership with Russia. And therefore, you can see this more emboldened approach, and that would therefore suggest that we need to take the deployment of these missiles these missile batteries, which have an extended range that can extend beyond Seoul, very seriously. However, I think the position of the National Intelligence Service of South Korea, which is cautious in not overinterpreting this development, I think is the right one. First of all, we have to ask ourselves, what are North Korea's missile capabilities? Your audience will be aware, of course, of the reports of some 11,000 shipments of arms and munitions to Russia to support its war in Ukraine from the DPRK. That's one critical factor in explaining the strengthened relationship between Pyongyang and Moscow. And therefore, it's an open question, and legitimate question, whether North Korea, even with these new batteries, will have sufficient missiles to actually pose a direct threat to South Korea in this new, more extended fashion. So I think that's one reason, I think, to be cautious, but also the question about North Korea's intentions. As we said during the Cold War, we have to focus both on capabilities and intentions. And that raises the obvious question, why would Kim Jong-un at this stage be contemplating direct military action against South Korea? Some of this may be, in effect, not only an effort to bolster his position at home as the military commander of the country, to demonstrate to his own people that he is strong and capable and that the country has enhanced its military capabilities, but also to deflect attention away from problems at home, not least economic problems, the impact of the recent flooding that has been a source of concern to Kim Jong-un. We've seen him patrolling areas of the country where the flooding has been most severe. And therefore, pivoting to the military side of things is a way of reassuring his public at home that even with these difficulties on the home front, as it were, economically and in terms of the natural environment, the country remains resilient. Finally, looking ahead to November, Kim may be making his own calculations by reinforcing the North's military capabilities, including with the deployment of these missile batteries. He may be sending a signal to Washington, either to Donald Trump or to Kamala Harris, about the importance of taking North Korea seriously. This may be, if you like, a pre-negotiating gambit on his part to try and ensure that once the election is out of the way, and if the door opens to new talks between Washington and Pyongyang, he can present North Korea in the most credible and convincing way as a military actor on the peninsula.
And Dr. Nelson Wright, Kim Jong-un oversaw a performance test of what the North called suicide drones on Saturday, calling for more production to bolster the country's war preparedness. The Pentagon has said it takes threats from the drones seriously. What's your analysis of the suicide drones? Could there be a possible drone cooperation between Pyongyang and Moscow?
Well, it would make sense, wouldn't it? When you see the activity of Russia in the war in Ukraine and the use of drone technology, Russia is an obvious partner. We know that North Korea under Kim Jong-un has been serious about developing all manner of different drone technology, not just these so-called suicide drones, surveillance drones. It was back in 2022 when South Korea had to confront, frankly, the embarrassment of seeing North Korean drones penetrate into the airspace around Seoul, as close to the presidential office. This is a reminder, if you like, of North Korea's ability not only to threaten South Korea, but also to engage in, if you like, technical propaganda wars. And this is something that is really important to Kim Jong-un. It makes sense both in terms of his military capabilities and those political, rhetorical propaganda dynamics that I referred to. Having said that, in order to really develop this technology, it's had to work closely with Russia. It was in 2023 when North Korea held a major military parade in which it unveiled some of its new drone technology. The then Russian defense minister was present at that parade, and I think that's, if you like, pretty strong circumstantial evidence to suggest that Russia and North Korea could be cooperating in this area. It's not the only country, of course, that might be a useful partner to North Korea. There has been talk about closer ties with Iran, which also might have some of this critical drone technology. And if we extend the technology dimension more broadly to think about dual-use technology, then there are other countries, including China, where North Korea may be in a position to develop access to the sort of technology that will allow it to develop a more sophisticated drone capability. And it's in that area, areas where technological cooperation between Chinese and North Korean universities like Kim-Chek University, the Pyongyang University for Science and Technology, shows signs of, I think, troubling evidence that North Korean technical officials and academics may be able to evade international sanctions, even, dare I say it, in cooperation with US universities. This dual-use technology needs to be monitored very, very carefully, I think, because there's no doubt that North Korea has been moving in a steady direction to enhance its drone capabilities.
And very quickly, before we let you go, Professor Lim, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is in Beijing for high-level talks. What sort of outcome do you expect from the visit?
Well, first of all, I think many people feel like pretty much, relieved to see these kind of continuous efforts to have a dialogue between Washington and Beijing, while they are still, of course, competing in many different ways. Of course, they do have various agenda topics to discuss, but number one priority will be absolutely the cross-strait issues or stability in the South China Sea, South and East China Sea. These kind of more like maritime security-related issues will be, I think they already discussed this today, and they did have meetings, and they are trying to probably upgrade their dialogues, to maintain the stability. And so absolutely these kind of more military stability is one issue. And at the same time, if we recall our memory, even the President Biden and the President Xi, when they met in the San Francisco during their APEC meeting, again, the fentanyl-like drug issue was one of the top priority, which was discussed between the two, which is pretty unusual compared to the past. So this kind of more like, social issue, those that can be caused by the drug, that can be, I think, one of the agenda. Or another probably agenda we need to probably pay attention is, again, the President Biden, his term is ending, so probably they might have discussed on the chance to have probably the last summit between the President Biden and the President Xi. We'll see. I think that they already discussed many different topics, and I'm also looking forward to seeing the outcomes.
All right, due to time constraint, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Professor Lim and Dr. Nilsson Wright, for your perspectives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.
Completely new. But some